Subscribe to Echo Tales for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. It started with a drip. Not loud, not alarming, just soft and steady. Like a quiet reminder that things eventually fall apart when left alone too long. Maya had first noticed it 2 days ago, echoing through the silence of her kitchen. A leak, somewhere under the sink. She'd meant to fix it, or at least call someone. But in truth, it wasn't just the pipe she was avoiding. It was everything else. Her small cottage sat at the edge of town, tucked behind a row of tired elm trees. It was the kind of house that looked peaceful from the outside, but inside it carried the weight of stories unspoken. Since her divorce nearly 2 years ago, Maya had made this place her retreat. No visitors, no parties, just quiet mornings with tea, evenings with old vinyl records, and a worn journal she never let anyone read. When the leak finally began to soak the cabinet floor, she reached for her phone, scrolling through a list of local handymen. Most names were strangers, until she saw his, Daniel Carter. Her thumb hesitated above the contact. She hadn't spoken to him since everything fell apart. He used to be a friend. His friend, really. Her ex-husband's closest buddy, the one who always showed up early to cookouts, always stayed late to help clean. There were small things she remembered, like how Daniel had never quite fit in with the other guys. He was quieter, more thoughtful. He always listened more than he spoke. And sometimes, she caught him looking at her like he wanted to say something but never did. Maybe it was foolish, but she pressed call. Now, standing in the doorway in her oversized sweater and bare feet, Maya froze as she saw him again for the first time in years. Daniel looked different. Older maybe, but still familiar. Rain speckled his shoulders as he stood on her porch, holding a toolbox in one hand. His hair was a little shorter, his beard a little more grown in, but his eyes, they were exactly the same. Gray, steady, unreadable. "Hey," he said gently, smiling. "Long time." Maya tried to find her voice. "Yeah, I guess it has been." They stood in the doorway longer than they should have, both silently taking in what time had done to the other. She stepped aside at last, letting him in, and the air inside seemed to shift the moment he crossed the threshold. It was the same space she had lived in every day, but suddenly, it felt different. Warmer. Unfamiliar. Daniel moved through the kitchen with ease, setting down his tools without asking where to go. Of course he remembered. He'd been here more times than she could count, back when things were normal. Back when the laughter in the house hadn't sounded forced. "You been doing okay?" he asked, crouching near the sink. Maya gave a half shrug. "Some days. Others not so much." He nodded without looking up. The sound of metal tools tapping against tile filled the silence. But beneath it, something unspoken hummed between them. She watched him work, her hands wrapped tightly around a steaming mug. He didn't ask about her ex, didn't ask why she'd disappeared after the separation. And maybe that was what unsettled her most. Not what he said, but what he didn't. The pipe hissed as he adjusted it. She sipped her tea. And in that quiet moment, Maya realized something. This wasn't just about fixing a leak. It was about something else returning into her life. Something she thought she had buried. Something she hadn't quite named yet, but it had gray eyes and careful hands, and it had come back. Not just to fix the pipes. Daniel worked quietly, the kind of quiet that made every little sound feel louder. The soft clink of his tools, the occasional creak of the old cottage floorboards, even Maya's own breath as she sat at the kitchen table, pretending to read a recipe magazine she hadn't touched in months. The silence between them wasn't awkward. Not exactly. It was more like a pause between sentences in a conversation that had never quite finished. He had always been like this, careful, patient, unassuming. When he used to come over with her ex, Maya had noticed how he'd take in everything without saying much. He watched people. He noticed the small things, like the way she used to hum while cooking, or how she'd retreat into the garden whenever the argument started. Now, he was under her sink, sleeves rolled up, focused and steady. It felt surreal to have him here, again after everything that had happened. Like the universe had pressed rewind, but only for one of them. Wrench, he muttered, mostly to himself. He reached back, and Maya instinctively stood to hand it to him. Their fingers brushed. Just a second, a breath, and her heart jumped like it had touched an electric wire. She sat back down quickly, her cheeks warm. "You've changed the place," Daniel said after a few moments, still looking down at the pipe. "I mean, it looks like you've made it yours." Maya glanced around the room. New curtains, different lighting. The old photographs were gone, replaced by artwork she had painted herself. She had tried so hard to erase the past, but in truth, it still lingered in corners, like a scent you couldn't wash out completely. "I had to," she replied softly. "Too many ghosts." He paused, his hands still. Then, in a voice lower than before, he said, "I figured." Maya didn't respond right away. She didn't have to. The truth had a way of hovering between people who had seen the same storm and walked away from it in different directions. Daniel sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm going to have to replace a couple of fittings, but it's nothing serious," he said, back to business. But his voice held something else, concern maybe, familiarity, care. She nodded. "Tea?" "Always." Maya moved to the kettle, grateful for something to do. As the water heated, she glanced over her shoulder. He was looking around the kitchen, not snooping, just seeing, absorbing the details the way someone does when they're trying to understand a place or a person. "I remember this song," he said, as an old tune played softly in the background. She'd put on the record out of habit, but now it filled the room with a kind of nostalgia that felt dangerous. "You used to play it when you cooked," he added, a faint smile on his lips. She looked at him. "You remember that?" "I remember, more than I probably should." The words hung in the air between them, delicate and unfinished. For a moment, Maya didn't know what to say. Her hand tightened around the handle of the kettle, though it hadn't started to boil yet. A familiar ache began to form in her chest. The ache that came when someone saw a part of you thought was long gone. She didn't know what it was, this thing stirring quietly between them. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was something else. But when their eyes met again, something flickered there. Recognition, regret, and something deeper still. Something that neither of them was ready to name just yet. And that's when he said it. Quietly. Carefully. "I know, Maya." She blinked. "Know what?" But Daniel didn't answer. Not yet. Because some truths take time to rise to the surface. Just like old feelings, waiting quietly beneath a sink that's finally ready to be fixed. By the time the pipe was finally repaired, the rain outside had deepened from a drizzle into a slow, thoughtful rhythm, tapping gently against the windows like fingers asking to be let in. The house felt warmer now, not because of the radiator or the tea, but because Daniel was still there. And somehow, that changed everything. He didn't seem in a hurry to leave, and Maya didn't ask him to. She told herself it was just politeness. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that. She liked the silence between them, the kind that wasn't awkward, just filled with things that hadn't been said yet. The rain gave them a reason to stay in. The tea gave them something to hold, and the old vinyl playing in the background gave them a shared memory to stand on, as fragile and comforting as an old photograph. They sat across from each other in the living room, cups in hand, the soft, golden light of a table lamp casting long shadows. It could have been years ago. It could have been tomorrow. That's how timeless the moment felt. "You still play vinyl," Daniel said, nodding toward the spinning record. "You always did like things that had weight to them." Maya smiled faintly. "Digital music feels like air. This," she gestured toward the old player, "feels like something you can feel in your bones." He nodded, and they both listened. For a moment to the soft crackle of the record, the voice of a long-gone singer weaving through the air like a memory coming home. Maya took a sip of tea and glanced over at him. "You never married." It wasn't a question. She already knew. Small towns had a way of sharing news whether you asked for it or not. Daniel didn't look surprised. "No," he said simply. "Never quite found the right person." There was something unspoken in that sentence, something that hinted at timing, at missed chances, at the possibility that maybe the right person wasn't about finding, but returning to. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "And you? Do you ever think about what might have been different?" Maya swallowed. "All the time." There it was. Honesty, raw and open, hanging in the space between them like steam rising from their mugs. She didn't want to pretend. Not tonight. Not with him. "Daniel," she said softly, putting her cup down. "Before, in the kitchen, you said you knew." He nodded slowly. "I did." She waited. Her breath caught somewhere in her chest. "I know your secret," he said again. "I've known it for a long time." Her heart raced. The words felt heavy, but not threatening. It wasn't what he knew that frightened her. It was how gently he carried it. "Which one?" she asked, half smiling, half defensive. "Because I have more than a few." He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "The one you buried under a strong face in silence. The one no one else dared to ask about. The reason you left. The truth you never told anyone because you thought no one would believe you. Or worse, they would, and still turn away." Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but from the way he saw her, from the way he always had, even back when he wasn't supposed to look at her that way. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said. The record hummed in the background. The rain kept falling. And Maya felt, for the first time in a very long time, that maybe she wasn't alone. That maybe, just maybe, someone had been holding space for her truth all along. And even though Daniel hadn't said the words out loud, his eyes told her everything. He knew her secret, but more importantly, he had never judged her for it. There were no. Silence after Daniel's words felt louder than anything else in the room. Maya sat still, her fingers curled around the edge of her teacup, as if holding onto something solid could keep her from falling apart. Her secret, the one she had wrapped in layers of denial, shame, and silence, had finally surfaced. Not because she had said it, but because someone else had finally seen it. She swallowed, eyes fixed on the rising steam. "How long have you known?" Daniel looked down at his hands. The same hands that had just fixed her sink like it was the simplest thing in the world. Since that night, after the argument. Maya flinched slightly. Her ex, the shouting, the door slamming, the storm that followed. It was all still so vivid, even if she had buried the pieces. "I thought no one was around," she whispered. "I was," he said quietly. "I had come by to drop off a charger he'd left in my truck. I didn't plan to stay. But I heard the yelling through the open window." Her throat tightened. "So you saw?" "I saw enough," he said, his voice steady but laced with sorrow. I saw the bruise on your cheek. I saw the way you sat, outside afterward, trying to breathe like the air itself had turned against you. Maya looked away, her eyes welling with tears. She had worked so hard to protect herself, to tell the world a quieter story, one that didn't make people uncomfortable. Why didn't you say anything back then? Daniel's eyes softened. Because I didn't know how. I was afraid I'd say the wrong thing, afraid you'd deny it, or that I'd push you away when all I wanted was to be there for you. There was a pause, long and fragile. I regret it, he added, every day. Maya wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. She wasn't angry, not really. What she felt was something else, something more complicated. Relief, fear, and somewhere underneath it all, a flicker of gratitude. Kept quiet too, she said. Not because I was protecting him, I didn't want to be seen as the woman who stayed too long, or the one who let it happen. It was easier to disappear than to explain. Daniel nodded slowly. But you don't have to explain it to me. The way he said it, so calm, so certain, it undid something inside her. For the first time in what felt like years, she let herself cry. Not the kind of crying that needed tissues or dramatic sobs. Just quiet tears, rolling freely, like a dam finally loosening after holding back the weight of everything she had carried alone. Daniel didn't move closer. He didn't interrupt. He just sat there, giving her the space to fall apart without fear. And somehow, that meant more than words ever could. When she finally looked up, her voice was soft but clear. I thought if I kept it buried, it would lose power over me. But all it did was grow heavier. I know, he said. That's how secrets work. They don't rot away. They root deeper. Maya breathed in deeply. The weight hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. Shared pain wasn't lighter, exactly. But it was no longer unbearable. She studied Daniel's face. His patience, his quiet strength, the way he looked at her like she wasn't broken but brave. You still care, she said, almost to herself. He smiled gently. I never stopped. And though the words were simple, they felt like a lifeline thrown into a sea she hadn't realized she was still drowning in. For the first time, she wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. Maya didn't remember falling asleep, but when she woke, the room was dimmer, bathed in the soft amber of early evening. The rain had quieted to a whisper outside, just a soft tapping now, like a lullaby the house knew by heart. She blinked and found herself curled on the living room couch, an old knit blanket draped gently over her legs. Daniel wasn't in the chair across from her anymore. For a split second, panic stirred. Had he left? Had this been a dream or some soft memory? Her tired heart conjured up just to keep her warm? Then she heard a sound from the kitchen. Not loud, just the subtle clink of glassware, the low hum of a man who didn't know he was humming. She sat up slowly. Daniel was there, drying a dish with quiet care. He turned when he noticed her and smiled in that familiar, grounding way that always felt more like home than any place she'd lived. You were out for a bit, he said gently. Didn't want to wake you. Maya gave a small nod, brushing her hair behind her ear. I didn't mean to fall asleep. You looked like you needed the rest, he said, walking toward her with 2 fresh mugs of tea. She accepted hers with a small, grateful smile. You always did know when to show up at the right time. Daniel sat down beside her this time. Not across the room, not behind invisible walls, but right there, close. And the space between them now felt delicate, charged, like the air just before a storm, though not the dangerous kind, the kind that promised change. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat, sipping tea, listening to the quiet. Then Maya turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Back then?" Daniel looked at her, his expression open, sincere. "Because you were with him, and no matter what I saw or felt, I respected that. But after I left, after everything..." Her voice trembled. "You could have reached out. I wanted to," he said. "God, I wanted to. But I didn't want to show up like some knight who swoops in when you're broken. You deserve to rebuild without someone trying to fix you." Maya's heart clenched at his words. So many people had tried to fix her, to reshape her into something more palatable, more convenient. But not Daniel. He didn't want her different. He just wanted her whole. "And now?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he placed his mug down carefully, then looked her in the eyes. Really looked. "Now I just want to be near you," he said. "No expectations. No fixing. Just here, if you'll let me." Maya stared at him, every part of her fighting between fear and longing. Because in Daniel's presence, she felt both fragile and safe. And that was terrifying, because it meant she cared again. It meant she hoped again. "I don't know how to do this anymore," she admitted. "I don't know how to let someone close without wondering when they'll leave." "I'm not going anywhere," he said simply. And somehow she believed him. She reached out, hesitantly, and their hands met in the space between them. Warmth bloomed instantly, an unspoken promise exchanged in a single touch. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. But in that quiet living room, beneath the sound of soft rain and an old record spinning on repeat, something beautiful began to take root. Not a new beginning, but maybe the continuation of something that had waited patiently, in silence, for its time to arrive. Morning light spilled softly through the kitchen window, stretching across the floor like quiet hope. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the world washed and still. Maya stood barefoot by the sink, watching the steam rise from her cup of coffee. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was bracing for something to go wrong. There was still fear, yes, but it no longer ruled her. Behind her, she heard soft footsteps. Daniel entered the room, shirt rumpled from sleeping on the couch, hair slightly messy. But there was something deeply comforting in the way he looked at her. Like seeing her like this, unguarded and calm, was something sacred. "You didn't have to sleep on the couch," she said gently. "I know," he replied with a quiet smile. "But I didn't want to move too fast. I wasn't here for that." Maya nodded. That had been the difference. Every other man in her life had taken. Daniel offered, and waited. She turned, resting against the counter. "It feels different this morning." He leaned on the other side, mirroring her. "Because it is." A silence fell between them, not empty, but full. Like a pause in music that makes you lean in for the next note. "I thought letting someone in again would break me," Maya admitted. "But it's the keeping people out that nearly did." Daniel reached across the space between them, his fingers brushing against hers. "You're allowed to be cautious. But you're also allowed to love again." She looked into his eyes, steady, warm, familiar, and saw a man who had stayed. Not for what he wanted from her, but for who she was beneath the scars. "I spent years trying to hide who I was after him," she whispered. "I was ashamed of how long I stayed, of how much I put up with, of the fact that the woman everyone, thought was strong was really scared all the time. You weren't weak, Daniel said. You were surviving, and now you're healing. That's a different kind of strength. His words settled inside her like sunlight on cold skin. Healing. Yes. That's what this was. She glanced down at their hands, his thumb now lightly tracing the top of hers. The warmth was subtle, but grounding, reassuring. I don't know what this is between us, she said honestly, but it feels real. It is, he said, and we don't have to name it right away. Let it grow. Let it be. Maya smiled. It was strange how, after all the chaos, something so simple, like fixing a leaky pipe, had led her back to this place, this moment, this man. I keep thinking, she said softly. What if I hadn't called you? What if you hadn't come? Daniel looked at her with a softness that made her chest ache. I would have found a reason, sooner or later, and she believed him, completely. Outside, the world was waking up. Birds chirped in the distance. A breeze slipped through the open window, carrying the scent of damp earth and something new, like a promise. Maya let out a slow breath, leaning into Daniel's shoulder. You know, I used to say this house was broken, that it reminded me of everything that went wrong. And now? He asked, brushing his cheek against her hair. Now? She smiled. It reminds me that broken things can be fixed, and so can hearts. He kissed the top of her head, a gesture more tender than anything she'd ever known. There was no rush, no pressure, just presence. And in that small kitchen, with the pipes finally quiet and their silence finally shared, Maya realized something beautiful. The life she thought had ended was just beginning.